Contradiction number 5, security equals instability. There are major examples in the last century that prove that democracy is just as apt to cause instability and even war than it is to create stability. The first is the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the First World War. After its defeat, it was up to the Allies to decide its system of government, whether it should remain a monarchy or become a democracy. And the American president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, declared that he would only permit the continuation of the state and have good relationships with it if it revoked the monarchy and became a democracy. This obviously was what we expected of him and every freedom-sympathizing believer in democracy. However, the point of these contradictions is to show you that good intentions may count for nothing and may even lead to foul consequences. One person who disagreed with Wilson was Winston Churchill, who was only an MP at the time. With his usual prophetic and characteristic outspokenness, he regarded the democratization and dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as a, and I quote, milestone to disaster, end of quote. How could this be perceived as anything but a villainous speech against liberal values? However, within 20 years, the democratization of the Austro-Hungarian Empire would prove to be a major cause of the Second World War. What Europe needed more than freedom was stability and the prevention of German rearmament. The latter was reassured by the counterbalancing weight of already existing stronger states, of which the Austro-Hungarian Empire was originally one. Instead, by dissolving the empire, a void was created, and in Churchill's own words, and I quote, "And into that void rode a maniac of ferocious genius, Corporal Hitler," end of quote. Austria was Hitler's first conquest. Would it have been so if there was a strong empire to deter him? Probably not. The second example is Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore. As Prime Minister of Singapore, he led his tiny island from being an economic backwater of the former British Empire, dwarfed by the economic counterpart of Hong Kong, into a full-grown Asian tiger. This was done through the liberalization of the economy, not the liberalization of society. Some of Prime Minister Lee's policies favored things like eugenics, including encouraging highly educated women to have more children than women not so highly educated in 1984. Yet, Singapore has to be Socrates' shining example that the best form of government is not democracy, but a benevolent dictatorship. Singapore grew stably with him in power and making sure that he stayed in power. The last example comes from the consequence of the democratization of the Middle East, including Iraq and Libya and nations caught up in the Arab Spring. In almost all these cases, the countries have become far more unstable. Now, this is not down to the failure of democracy per se, but rather that power was up for grabs for insurgents as well. The point still stands. When preaching democracy, the situation may dictate that the nation is not ready yet. Many people think that democracy can occur, the British-American style, simply by drafting a constitution and creating institutions. No. Britain is the most advanced democracy in the West and even doesn't have a written constitution. Democracy, as it shows, is a collective state of mind. And that is manifest in society that stands upon other pillars such as the rule of law and the desire for peace and tolerance. Therefore, if you really want to know how democracy works or grows and becomes effective, you are better off learning its history rather than its codes. You will learn far more about British democracy by learning British and ancient Athenian history than reading the American Constitution. In British history, you learn how democracy is almost accidental, how it is forged through conflict, and that it develops organically. In fact, as Barack Obama said on his visit to the UK, the American Constitution is basically a summary of British history. And British history will show that democracy is not a law or a national event, but a process. As far as the Arab Spring is concerned, I'm surprised that the world expected new leaders and a new constitution to yield peace immediately. If democracy is to be effective in these regions, it will take much, much longer than that, and will probably involve more bloodshed. It did in America and Britain.